The internet is the happiest place on earth. Somewhere to feel safe. Somewhere to marvel at the true noble ambition of mankind. Where you and your best friends can discuss things in a calm, rational manner. Where a new and wonderful surprise is around every corner. The internet makes us better people. Now, we've covered some great types of games in our first few explains here on Phenomenerds, but for this one, we're actually going to talk about something else. We're going to talk about a website. Well, actually, when it comes to board games, this is the website. BoardGameGeek.com or BGG or The Geek is an online database for all things related to board gaming. If it is a published game, it is on this website. But it is not just a big long list of all the board games in the world in existence. It's actually this weird jumbled mess of board gaming experiences, opinions, rankings, game rules, news, reviews, forums, marketplaces, and these weird little icons next to people's names. It's basically a hell of a lot of information. Which means that when you first go on the website, it's a bit overwhelming. It's like trying to look into the Matrix in a blizzard. There are more random terms and icons than an iPhone reveal. It all just blurs into one user-baffling load of data. Which is why talking about Board Game Geek is almost as important as talking about board games themselves, because it's basically the IMDb of board games, which is both a simple way to describe it and a simplistic way of describing it. Because once you start to understand the functions of the site and you can finally see through the matrix, you know Kung Fu. You are the one. You realise that all of board gaming life is here. It's a thriving ecosystem of players, designers and journalists with reviews, and everything is updating, communicating and recommending and helping each other. And once you can finally navigate the site, there is no better place to find a new board game to play, and hopefully some new people to play it with. In the future. Not right now. BGG was first founded in the year 2000. That is a year before Wikipedia. And if you can't cast your mind back that far before this million-year-long pandemic, everyone dressed like this, rode these, and fancied her. Whoa. It was founded by Scott Alden and Dirk Solko and originally looked like this. It was a database of games with all their corresponding information, how many players, when it was created, who created it, and also session reports from people who played them. Over time, functions were added to the site one by one, kind of like a bungalow being extended piecemeal until it becomes a sprawling and sometimes labyrinthian mansion. Users were added, as was the function to upload photos for your games. Forums were added, and not just in general, but forum threads for each individual game. Over the last 20 years, the site has grown from 200 initial users to over 2 million individual gamers who all use the site's vast amount of information and data in order to become better gamers. And also sometimes tell people they're getting the rules wrong.
Board Game Geek is the single biggest board gaming website on the internet. Nothing even touches it in its scope, in its scale, in its number of hits. Board Game Geek is the single most important reference on the internet for gamers. It's a database of all the games ever done, from tic-tac-toe to the game that was just released yesterday at the close of the Essen Spiel convention out in Germany, the largest game convention in the world, digital this year, of course. So it is this huge database of game knowledge. I highly recommend, if you're interested in the hobby, to get yourself familiarized with Board Game Geek.
Board Game Geek is a fantastic site. I love it to bits as a hobbyist. So I've been using it for ages now. I had to stop myself going on it because I was going on it every day and answering any rules questions and things on games that I've done. I love just kind of being interactive in that way. But I realized it was taking up so much of my day, I had to kind of put an embargo on. And now whenever I log into it, I've got like 200 notifications and I just close it and walk away. But generally, I love it. It's a fantastic site, just full of information. And if you ever want to find out, anything from who worked on a game to the latest rules clarifications in errata, you go to Board Game Geek and you'll find it. There's a great community around it. I've never quite cracked the forums side of it that much because it looks like it was designed pre-MySpace, and I think it was, and it hasn't really developed since then.
A good thing about Board Game Geek is it's has so much information, right? And it's a really good community spot for you to find out anything about board games. I rely on it quite a bit to understand reviews or component quality, things like that about a board game, things I want to see before I actually purchase the board game. As kind of the owner of this place, obviously I have access to a lot of board games, and what we always try to do is if we're selling a game, make sure we have copies of it people can open and play or just look at beforehand. So kind of, giving that tactile Board Game Geek experience. I think that's a great, resource, Board Game Geek, and a one-stop for everything, really good.
For me, Board Game Geek was a fantastic resource when I was just trying to learn more about board games. I knew that I liked certain genres of games, or even before I knew what genres of games there were, I was able to say, okay, I know I like this game, I'm going to look it up on Board Game Geek, see what other games are similar to it, and that is a fantastic thing about Board Game Geek. You can just see so many board games and what people think of them and what games are similar to them.
So what do people use Board Game Geek for? First of all, it's a great place to find board game news. Ta-da! There are weekly newsletters about what new board games are being released that week, as well as links to what gaming projects are launching on Kickstarter. Then, you got this little box here on the front page, the hotness. This lets you know the games that are busiest in terms of people checking them out and talking about them. So if you go away from the hobby for a while, you can come back and get a pretty good idea of the most significant games at that time. It's Gloomhaven. One of the most famous features of BGG, and also one of its trickiest for new gamers, is this. Click Browse, then All Board Games, and it will take you to the Board Game Geek ranking database. All of the games in the system ranked in order of user reviews. That means that these games are supposed to be the best of the best of the best, and a lot of gamers, when they enter the hobby, will use this to craft a definitive list of games that they should purchase. Does it mean that all the games on the list are actually good, though? Does it? Luke gets like a whole 20-minute video to discuss whether a game's actually good, and I've just done it in a sentence. What is he playing at? Some of the most fun party games ever created don't come anywhere near the top 100, and Agricola is number 30. And that's all about spending 3 hours watching your family starve to death on a farm. And apparently, that's an essential purchase. Be careful. From here, though, you can click on a game itself and find all of this information about it. First of all, this big important number here, that is the average rating. Anything more than a 6 is considered good. Anything more than a 7 is considered, very good. Anything more than 8 is God tier. And anything lower than 5 is the worst type of toxic dog. Monopoly has a 4.4. And that is more than it deserves. This page also has pictures, so you can see candid photos of what's in the box. Ooh, racy. It is the type of game it is, which you can click on to find other games that are similar to it, and you can find any available expansions for it. And down at the bottom you can find written and video reviews for each game, and below that, the forums, which, as you can imagine, is mostly people asking about the rules and other players helping them out, and only occasionally calling them a massive arsehole. But it's in these forums that you can find one of the sweetest things about BGG. Pretty much every single game designer is a user and loves nothing more than popping into the forum to chat about their games. Which means that if you're popping in there to ask a question about some rules, you could get a clarification from the person who actually designed the game. That is pretty sweet. That's why you shouldn't throw the word arsehole around. You might be calling the person who made it an arsehole. And that personal element pervades all of BGG. There are so many social things for people to use to connect to each other. Obviously, there's the forums, but there are also thousands of guilds for users to join. Maybe one for a certain city that all the gamers who live there can use to arrange and advertise meetups or arrange game sales. Or maybe one for fans of one particular type of board game, which is really handy because then you can click on an individual user, check out the games that they've been playing, check out their collection, see if they have any of them up for trade, and then send them private messages to arrange that trade. Because buying and selling is a huge part of BGG. Not only can you advertise which games you're wanting to buy and which of your games you'd be willing to trade for it, but sellers can set up their own little market stall and sell their games via the Geek Market. There's even a little box on the front page that leads to games being auctioned off on eBay. It's a brilliant way to build your collection as well as get rid of games that you no longer play anymore, and the biggest boost is that none of the money goes to Amazon. Well, hey, up yours, Bezos. And there are lots more little features to talk about, but the last major one is Geek Lists. Gamers can make lists about whatever, their personal top games, the best games by certain designers, the best party games, and what's sweet about it is that gamers can then comment on each individual choice, post their own links, have designers chip in, so gamers can make lists about whatever they want, their personal favourite games, the best games by a certain designer, the top 10 party games. I mean, it's basically Adam's job, but for fun. It obviously creates a really, really dense amount of data, but you can get quite a nuanced idea of how a living, breathing community feels about a certain game. But yes, like I said, it's basically a cubic buggerton of information.
Before you go onto Board Game Geek for the first time, do you make sure that you kind of know at least your starting point, know what games you do enjoy, and don't rely too much on the ratings, on what number of game it is on the list. A lot of them are a bit odd, in my opinion. Some people might disagree with me there, but don't go purely on, oh, this is the #1 game on Board Game Geek, because you might not like it at all.
I think it's hard to parse. I think Board Game Geek is very intimidating for the first person to go on. Like, there's different versions of games. You don't know what is what. It is the layout and the UI might need some tweaking for the average consumer to be able to go on and not be intimidated by how much content is in there. So for me, the only downside to it is how much content and how that's surfaced, I think, is a bit of a troublesome part for people trying to get into the hobby.
So the one kind of downside of Board Game Geek personally is, speaking as someone who is involved in the design and creation of games, you don't get any special treatment, which it sounds a bit spoiled to say it that way, but a lot of sites, like so Facebook, for example, if I have a Facebook account and a Facebook page, they're two different things. So if I'm running Facebook as a business, I have a lot of controls over what goes out there. With Board Game Geek, that doesn't exist. So when we made Robot Fight Club, we had to put everything on there through the same channels that any user does to submit fan content. So when we put up the official box cover, that had to go into a queue to be looked at by a moderator and approved. So we didn't know how long it would take for it to come up. Whenever we put in, a rule book or an errata document or something, it has to go into the queue and we have to wait. And that was really strange, because that feels very, I'm using an old term here, but that feels very Web 1.0 rather than Web 2.0, because that's how Board Game Geek really is. I think it shows they haven't quite come to the user-submitted content being the norm rather than an unusual thing that the rest of the internet has caught up on. But I have faith they're going to keep on updating it, and very soon it'll be as good as websites were back in the early 2010s.
It's internet, so there's always going to be some trolls. Okay, there's always going to be the people that will not even want to talk to you because you're new, but it's in the minority. There's a lot to cut through. I think that's the biggest con of the entire thing. It's not necessarily the best organized thing in the world, but once you learn a few of the various pieces of it, it's not too hard to get yourself through. If you're interested in what are the most highly rated games of all time, 2 clicks, maybe 1 click, 2 clicks, and you'll see the list. Well, you'll see the first 100, and then you can scroll and scroll. There's 80,000 or 100,000 games entered into that database. So for the knowledge that you can get, and then the resources of like, well, maybe I like this game. I don't know. I played it and I'm not sure. Let me see what other people think. Go there. You look up the game. You go to the forums and see what people are saying. I can't speak more highly of it. The pros way outweigh the cons of using a system like that.
So some final words of caution before I let any newbies loose on BGG. Remember that it is a gamer's game site, which means that it skews towards heavier, more complex games. If it dents the floor when you drop it, people tend to like it. So don't make the same mistake some people make when they join the hobby, looking up the top 10 board games on BGG and buying Agricola and wondering why none of your friends want to play it with you. But we can be farmers, guys. We can make minor improvements to our farmstead. Fun! We can grow corn. Fun! In the prestigious Top 100, there is only one party game. codenames, which is wildly unindicative of the mass market gaming scene. But the ranking system is incredibly useful when looking at the impact that games have made on the hobby, and often the most ambitious, innovative, and beloved games feature highly. But even some of the rankings are confusing because Decrypto is ranked the #1 party game, but in the overall rankings, it's Codenames that's above it. Now, that doesn't really have much practical impact for collectors, but it is an example of the site having perhaps too much data. It also means that trying to build a collection of the very best board games can be a bit treacherous because one list will always contradict another. So the best thing to do is get granular, read some reviews, watch some videos, go and ask on the forums, which generally speaking are way more friendly than Twitter, though there will always be somebody who's up for a bit of pedantic banter. I love me some rules. As a tool to improve your board gaming experience, BGG is unparalleled. Whether it's information about a game you own or research into your next purchase, or 20 purchases, I could always remortgage. Basically, you can't best it. But it's the community that it fosters that's its ultimate selling point. You've got friendly, knowledgeable players and talented designers all rubbing shoulders in the forums, and once your game night's over and your friends have gone home and you've packed your bits of plastic away, it is the perfect place to carry on the conversation. Oh man, I love the internet. What a lovely place. Hang on. What's a parental lock? Don't need. I'm an adult. Remove that. Let's see what the real internet. Oh my! Well, thank you for watching this explainer on Board Game Geek. If you like the video, give us a thumbs up and leave us a comment down below letting us know the best game that you found on Board Game Geek, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already for more awesome Phenomenerds content like Adam's essential 2-player game list.